In the upscale restaurant bathed in warm amber light, Audrey Whitmore smiled faintly as she looked across the table at the man sitting opposite her. His simple button-down shirt, worn shoes, calloused hands, everything about Henry Cole, a single father, made her feel embarrassed about this blind date. She let slip a mocking comment, unaware that at a table behind her, a silver-haired man was rising to his feet. When he raised his hand in a formal military salute, the entire room fell silent, and Audrey understood she had just insulted a hero. The evening had started like any other Thursday in downtown Boston. Audrey had arrived at the Sterling, exactly 15 minutes late, a deliberate choice she'd perfected over years of first dates. Let them wait a little, she'd always thought. It sets the tone. It established the power dynamic before a word was even spoken. She stepped through the heavy glass doors in her tailored navy dress, heels clicking against Italian marble, and scanned the dining room with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to evaluating everything in an instant. The restaurant was exactly as she remembered it. Crystal chandeliers cast warm pools of light across tables dressed in cream-colored linens, fresh flowers in simple glass vases, the subtle clink of silverware against fine china. This was her world. A world of understated elegance where people spoke in hushed tones about mergers and acquisitions, where business cards exchanged hands over 30-year-old scotch, where everyone knew the rules of the game because they'd all played it long enough to master it. Henry Cole was already seated at table 12, the one by the window overlooking the harbor. He wore a pressed blue Oxford shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, clean jeans, and leather work boots that had seen better days, but were polished to a respectful shine. His hands rested flat on the white tablecloth, fingers broad and scarred in ways that spoke of years doing something other than typing on a keyboard. There was a stillness about him that was unusual. Not nervousness. Not the fidgeting energy of someone trying to impress. Just a calm, patient presence, like someone accustomed to waiting for things beyond his control. He stood when he saw her approaching, a gesture so old-fashioned it almost made Audrey pause. "Ms. Whitmore?" His voice was low, steady. Not the confident boom of the executives she usually dated, but not timid either. Just calm. "Audrey is fine." She slid into her seat without offering her hand. "You're Henry." "Yes, ma'am." "Ma'am?" She was 31. The word grated. Henry Cole was 39 years old, though the lines around his eyes suggested someone who'd seen more than his years should carry. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Dorchester with his son Leo, who just turned 8 last month. Every morning at 5:30, Henry woke to make Leo breakfast before the school bus came. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a commercial building downtown, a job that required early mornings and calloused hands, but paid enough to keep them fed and housed. It was honest work. Good work. The kind that left you tired at the end of the day but let you sleep with a clear conscience. His wife Sarah had died 4 years ago. Cancer. The aggressive kind that takes everything before you even understand what's happening. Leo had been too young to really remember her voice now, which broke Henry's heart in quiet ways he never spoke about. Being a single father wasn't something Henry had planned for, but it was what life had given him, and he approached it the same way he approached everything else, with discipline, consistency, and a refusal to complain about circumstances he couldn't change. Audrey Whitmore came from a different world entirely. She'd graduated summa cum laude from Cornell with a degree in economics, spent 3 years at Goldman Sachs, and now worked as a senior analyst at a private equity firm in the financial district. Her apartment in Back Bay had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Charles River. She drove a German sedan, wore designer labels without logos, because true luxury didn't need to announce itself, and had grown accustomed to a certain caliber of man. Investment bankers, attorneys, surgeons, men whose shoes cost more than some people's monthly rent, men who knew which wines paired with which courses, who'd vacationed in the same European cities she had, who understood the unspoken rules of her social circle, men who could keep up with her, men who enhanced her image rather than diminishing it. This blind date had been her mother's idea, pushed with the relentless persistence only mothers possess. You're 31, Audrey. You can't be picky forever. Henry is a good man. Stable. Kind. Oh. Your father knows his father from the Veterans Association. Audrey had agreed only to stop the nagging, already planning how she'd politely excuse herself after 45 minutes, and a single glass of wine. Already composing the text message she'd send afterward explaining that, while he seemed nice, there just wasn't a connection. It was a script she'd perfected. Polite, but firm. Kind, but final. The restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of people who could afford $90 steaks. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. The lighting was intentionally dim, the kind that made everyone look slightly more attractive, and every moment feel slightly more intimate than it actually was. Audrey ordered a Pinot Grigio. Henry asked for water. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Everything about him was being catalogued, weighed, measured against the standards she'd built over a decade of dating in a city where status was currency and appearance was everything. The waiter brought menus bound in leather. Audrey didn't open hers. She'd eaten here a dozen times before. So, she began, her tone carrying the false brightness of someone going through motions they'd rather skip entirely. What is it you do, Henry? I oversee maintenance and facilities for a commercial property downtown. Building systems, repairs, tenant requests. That kind of thing. She took a sip of wine. Maintenance. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Yes, ma'am. And you have a son? I do. Leo. Dadia. He's 8. Ma. And his mother? She passed away 4 years ago. Audrey's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not sympathy exactly. More like the mental recalculation of someone adjusting their assessment of an already disappointing situation. A widower. A single father. A man who worked with his hands and probably barely cleared $50,000 a year. This was worse than she'd imagined. I'm sorry for your loss, she said, the phrase automatic and empty. That must be difficult. Managing work and a child alone. We manage fine. Do you have help? Family nearby? Just us two. We do all right? Audrey set her wine glass down with a deliberate click. And you're looking to date again. Now, don't. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation wrapped in polite phrasing. Henry met her eyes directly. I was told you might be interested in meeting someone. If that's not the case, I understand. No hard feelings either way. She smiled the way people smile when they've already made up their mind but need to maintain appearances. It's just that I think compatibility matters. Lifestyle. Goals. Where someone is in their life. She paused, letting the implication settle. I work 80-hour weeks sometimes. I travel for business. My social circle is, well, it's demanding. I need a partner who can keep up with that world. I understand. Do you? She leaned forward slightly. Because no offense, Henry, but you're a single father working in building maintenance. You probably can't just drop everything for a weekend in the Hamptons or a charity gala that requires black tie. You have responsibilities. Constraints. The word constraints landed like a slap. Henry said nothing. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he didn't argue. Didn't defend himself. Just sat there absorbing her judgment with the same quiet endurance that had carried him through harder things than a bad date. Audrey felt emboldened by his silence. She'd started this evening thinking she'd be polite, but distant. Now she felt something sharper rising in her chest. Irritation, maybe. Or resentment that her mother had wasted her time with this. She glanced around the restaurant, suddenly aware of how out of place Henry looked among the tailored suits and designer dresses. Look, she said, her voice dropping just low enough to feel confidential, but loud enough that nearby tables could still hear if they paid attention. I appreciate you coming out tonight. I'm sure you're a perfectly nice guy. But I don't think we're a match. I date men who are ambitious, established, men who've built something significant. Not, she gestured vaguely at him, someone who's still figuring things out. No. A woman at the next table glanced over, her conversation pausing mid-sentence. Henry's hands pressed flat against the tablecloth. The only sign that her words had landed was the way his thumb twitched once, twice, then went still. You have to understand, Audrey continued, warming to her theme now. I've worked incredibly hard to get where I am. I've sacrificed. I've earned my success. And I think I deserve a partner who's on the same level. Someone who can match me intellectually, professionally, financially. Is that really so unreasonable? No, ma'am, Henry said quietly. It's not unreasonable to know what you want. Exactly. She picked up her wine again, satisfied. I'm glad you get it. I just think we want different things out of life. You're focused on, stability, routine, taking your son to school and coming home every night. And that's fine. It's admirable even. But it's not what I'm looking for. I need someone with vision, drive, someone who's going places. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. A busboy refilling water glasses moved a little more slowly near their table, clearly listening. The couple 2 tables over had stopped pretending not to notice. Even the waiter hovering near the bar was watching now, menu in hand, waiting to see if he should approach or stay back. Audrey set her wine glass down harder than she meant to. I don't date men who've settled for less. I just don't. That was the line that did it. The sentence that crossed from honesty into cruelty. It hung in the air like smoke from a gun already fired. Henry stood up slowly. Not in anger. Not in a rush. Just stood, with the careful deliberation of a man who'd learned long ago that some battles aren't worth fighting because the other person has already decided you've lost. I appreciate your time tonight, Audrey, he said. His voice was still calm, still respectful. I hope you find what you're looking for. He reached into his wallet and placed 2 $20 bills on the table. More than enough to cover the water he'd drunk and the trouble he'd caused by existing in her presence. Then he turned toward the door. That's when the man at table 19 stood up. George Whitmore was 67 years old. His hair had gone completely silver 15 years ago, but he still kept it military short, the way he'd worn it for 40 years in the United States Marine Corps. He'd retired with the rank of colonel, though he rarely used the title anymore. He'd commanded men in 2 wars, and more classified operations than he was allowed to discuss. He'd seen combat. He'd lost friends. He'd made decisions that kept him awake some nights even now, decades later. Tonight he'd been at the Sterling for a business dinner with 2 former colleagues, both of whom now sat frozen in their seats, watching him rise with the kind of abrupt focus that made everyone within 20 feet go quiet. George had noticed the man at table 12 the moment he'd walked in. Something about the way he moved, the way he held his shoulders, the unconscious discipline in how he pulled out the chair for the woman, how he sat with his back straight but not stiff, how his eyes swept the room once, just once, the way someone trained to assess threats and exits would do without thinking. And then there was the faded mark on his left forearm. George had only caught a glimpse when Henry reached for his water glass, but it was enough. The outline of a tattoo that had been mostly removed, probably with laser treatment, but not completely. Never completely. George knew that insignia. He'd seen it before. On exactly 8 men in his entire career. Men who didn't exist in any official record. Men who'd done things the government would never acknowledge. When Audrey had started talking louder, when her words had turned from dismissive to cruel, George had felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd recognized her voice before he saw her face. His daughter. His only child. The girl he'd raised to be strong and independent and successful. And here she was, publicly humiliating a man who'd earned more honor in a single night than most people earn in a lifetime. George didn't speak. He simply stood, turned to face Henry Cole's retreating back, and raised his right hand in the formal salute he'd given and received countless times over 4 decades of service. The entire restaurant went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of absolute absence of sound that only happens when something so unexpected occurs that every person in the room holds their breath at exactly the same moment. Henry stopped walking. He didn't turn around immediately. For 3 full seconds he stood perfectly still, his back to the room, his hand resting on the back of an empty chair. And then, slowly, he turned. When he saw George Whitmore standing at attention, hand raised, something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition. The kind that comes when 2 soldiers meet years after a war. They both survived. Henry's posture changed. His shoulders squared in a way they hadn't all evening. His chin lifted. And almost on instinct, his own right hand came up in response, returning the salute with the precision of muscle memory that never fully fades. The 2 men held the salute for what felt like an eternity. 5 seconds. 10. An entire conversation happening in the silence between them. Then George spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed restaurant. Captain Cole. Not Henry. Captain T. Audrey's wine glass slipped from her fingers. It didn't shatter. The thick carpet caught it, but red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. Colonel Whitmore, Henry replied quietly. It's been a long time, sir. Too long, Captain. Far too long. George dropped his salute and crossed the room in 4 long strides. He extended his hand, and Henry took it. The handshake lasted longer than courtesy required. There was weight in it. History. You 2 know each other? Audrey's voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. George finally looked at his daughter. Really looked at her. And in his eyes was something she'd never seen directed at her before. Disappointment. Deep and cutting, and absolute. Know him? George said. This man saved my life. Saved the lives of 19 other Marines in a mission that still doesn't exist in any official record. He turned back to Henry. Helmand Province. August 2008. You remember, Captain? I remember, sir. George's voice grew quieter but somehow more forceful. We were pinned down. 3 hours under fire. Communications cut. 2 men wounded. 1 critical. We'd have all died there if Captain Cole hadn't. He stopped, shook his head. No. You know what? I'm not even allowed to tell the whole story. It's still classified. But what I can say is that this man single-handedly extracted our entire unit from a situation that should have killed us all. He was shot twice. Took shrapnel from an explosion. Kept moving anyway. Didn't stop until every single one of us was on that helicopter. The restaurant was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in abandoned drinks. They gave him the Silver Star, George continued. Would have been the Medal of Honor if the mission existed on paper. He was special operations. The kind we don't talk about. The kind who go where everyone else can't, or won't. And when he finally came home, after everything he'd given, after everything he'd sacrificed, George's voice cracked. He came home to find out his wife had 3 months to live. Cancer. All. Aggressive. Terminal. D. And instead of falling apart, instead of letting it break him, he held her hand every single day in that hospital. He took leave. He was there when she died, and then he raised their son alone. Audrey couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be the same man she'd just called a failure. Henry Cole never once used his service record to get ahead, George said. Never mentioned his medals. Never traded on what he'd done. He just went back to civilian life, found honest work, and raised his boy the best way he knew how. With integrity. With humility. Why? With honor. He turned back to Audrey. And my daughter just called him a man who settled for less. Tears started rolling down Audrey's cheeks before she even realized she was crying. Henry shook his head gently. Colonel, you don't need to. Yes, I do, Captain. Because someone needs to say it. George's voice was steel now. This man is worth 100 of the pompous, self-important idiots who think success is measured in salary and square footage. He's the kind of man who runs toward danger when everyone else runs away. He's the kind of father who wakes up at dawn to make his son breakfast and tucks him in every single night. He's the kind of human being who makes the world better just by being in it. No, not finding me. The weight of the words pressed down on Audrey's chest until she thought she might suffocate. People at other tables were staring now. Not at Henry. At her. She could feel their judgment like heat. Could see in their eyes exactly what they thought of the woman who'd been cruel to a war hero because his shoes were scuffed and his job wasn't impressive enough. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words came out broken. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Henry looked at her for a long moment. There was no anger in his face. No satisfaction at seeing her brought low. Just a kind of quiet sadness that was somehow worse than fury would have been. "You didn't need to know," he said gently. "You just needed to see me as a person. Just a regular person trying his best. That should have been enough." The simplicity of it destroyed her. "I don't need an apology, Audrey," Henry continued. "I don't need you to feel bad. I just need you to understand something." He glanced around the restaurant, at all the watching faces, then back to her. "There are good men everywhere. Decent men. Men who work hard and love their kids and do the right thing even when nobody's watching. They don't all have impressive job titles. They don't all have money or status. But they have value. They have worth. And if you can't see that, if you can only measure people by what they can do for your image or your lifestyle, then you're going to miss out on a lot of good people. And that's going to be your loss, not theirs." He picked up his 220s from the table, folded them carefully, and handed them to the waiter who'd been standing frozen nearby. "For the water, keep the change." Then he turned to George. "It was an honor to see you again, sir." "The honor was mine, Captain. It always will be." They shook hands one more time. And then Henry Cole walked out of the Sterling with the same quiet dignity he'd walked in with, leaving behind a room full of people who'd never forget his face or the woman who'd failed to see what was right in front of her. Audrey sat in the wreckage of her own making, wine soaking into the tablecloth, mascara running down her cheeks. Her father standing over her with an expression that made her feel like a child who deeply disappointed someone she desperately wanted to impress. "Dad," she started, but he held up a hand. "Not here. Not now." His voice was quiet but firm. "I'm ashamed of you, Audrey. Truly ashamed. And I think you need to sit with that for a while." He returned to his table, left cash to cover his own bill, and walked out without looking back. Audrey sat alone in the restaurant for 20 more minutes. People kept glancing over, whispering. She heard fragments. "Did you hear what she said to him? Can you imagine?" And she had no idea. The pity was somehow worse than the contempt. Finally she stood, gathered her purse, and left. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. Didn't meet anyone's eyes. Just walked out into the cool Boston night, feeling smaller than she'd ever felt in her entire life. The days that followed were the strangest of Audrey's life. She went to work. She attended meetings. She reviewed spreadsheets and financial models and made recommendations that would move millions of dollars. And none of it felt real. None of it felt like it mattered. The numbers on her screen seemed hollow. The presentations she gave felt performative. The congratulations from colleagues when she closed a deal landed like noise she couldn't quite process. She kept thinking about the way her father had looked at her. The disappointment in his eyes. Her whole life, George Whitmore had been her hero. The man who'd served his country with honor. Who'd been tough but fair, demanding but loving. She'd built her entire identity around being strong like him, successful like him, uncompromising like him. She'd thought she was living up to his example, making him proud with every promotion, every achievement, every rung she climbed on the ladder of success. But she'd missed the most important parts. The humility. The respect for people who served quietly. The understanding that real strength doesn't need to announce itself. The recognition that honor isn't something you display on a resume or mention at cocktail parties. It's something you carry in how you treat the barista who makes your coffee and the janitor who cleans your office, and the stranger who opens a door for you. It's in the small, invisible moments when no one important is watching. She started paying attention to things she'd never noticed before. The janitor in her office building who came in at 6 every morning and always had a kind word for everyone. She learned his name was Marcus. He'd worked there for 16 years. Had 3 kids in college. Worked a second job on weekends to help pay their tuition. The single mother in accounting who worked part-time but never missed a deadline. Her name was Jennifer. Her daughter had special needs. She coordinated therapy appointments and school meetings, and somehow still showed up every day with a smile. The delivery driver who remembered everyone's names and asked about their families. Carlos. Army veteran. 2 tours in Iraq. Now drove a truck and seemed genuinely happy to see people even when they barely looked up from their phones when he delivered their packages. People she'd walked past 1,000 times without really seeing them. One afternoon she called her father. He answered on the 3rd ring. "I want to understand," she said without preamble. "Tell me about him. About Henry. About what happened." George was quiet for a long time. "Some of it I can't tell you. It's still classified. But what I can say is that Captain Henry Cole was one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege of serving alongside. He was Delta Force, though that's not an official designation, and I shouldn't even be saying it out loud. He volunteered for the most dangerous assignments. Never asked for recognition. Never wanted medals. He just wanted to do the job and bring everyone home." "What happened?" "In Afghanistan? We were running support for a high-value extraction. Everything went wrong. Ambush. Heavy casualties. Henry was technically just our escort, but when the shooting started, he didn't hesitate. He flanked their position. Drew fire away from the wounded. Provided cover while we evacuated. He should have died 5 times over. But he didn't. He just kept fighting until every single Marine was on that bird." Audrey's throat tightened, and then he came home to his dying wife. 3 weeks later, Sarah had been diagnosed while he was deployed. She'd kept it from him, didn't want him distracted. By the time he found out, she was stage 4. He took immediate leave. Spent every day with her. Read to her. Held her hand. And when she passed, he requested discharge. Said his boy needed him more than the army did. He gave up his career. He chose what mattered most. George's voice was gentle now. "That's what real strength looks like, Audrey. Not climbing ladders or making money. Making the hard choice to put someone else first." She spent the next several weeks thinking about that. About what strength really meant. About what success really looked like. About all the ways she'd been measuring worth and finding people lacking based on scales that had nothing to do with who they actually were. She started volunteering at a veterans center downtown. Just 1 afternoon a week. Helping with paperwork. Listening to stories. Learning about the men and women who'd served and come home to a country that often didn't know how to honor them properly. She met soldiers who worked construction. Veterans who drove trucks. Former officers who managed retail stores. All of them with stories. All of them with honor. All of them living quiet lives of dignity that would never make headlines or LinkedIn profiles. And slowly, something in her began to shift. It was 3 months later when she saw them again. Audrey had stopped at a small park in Cambridge on a Saturday afternoon, sitting on a bench with coffee and a book she wasn't really reading. She'd been coming here lately. It was quiet. Simple. No one knew her. No one expected anything from her. That's when she heard the laughter. A child's laughter, bright and unself-conscious. She looked up and saw a boy racing across the grass, arms spread wide like wings, making airplane noises. And behind him, jogging to keep up, was Henry Cole. He was smiling. Really smiling in a way she hadn't seen that night at the restaurant. His whole face transformed when he looked at his son. There was so much love there it was almost painful to witness. The boy tripped, went down in a tumble, and immediately Henry was there, scooping him up, checking for scrapes, brushing dirt off his jeans. The care in every gesture. The gentleness. The complete devotion. Audrey stood before she realized what she was doing. Her heart was pounding. She didn't know what she was going to say. Didn't have a plan. Just knew she couldn't let this moment pass. "Henry," she called out. He turned, and his expression shifted. Not to anger. Not even to wariness. Just a kind of careful neutrality. "Audrey." She walked closer, acutely aware of how she must look. No makeup today. Just jeans and a sweater. Hair in a ponytail. She probably looked as different from that night at the Sterling as it was possible to look. "I don't want to intrude," she said quickly. I saw you and I needed to say something. Okay. I'm sorry." The words came out in a rush. "I'm so incredibly sorry for how I treated you. For what I said. For how I judged you. I was wrong. About everything. And I know apologizing doesn't undo it. But I needed you to know that I understand now. What I did. How cruel it was. How small I was." Henry listened without interrupting. His son had come to stand beside him, holding his hand, looking up at this strange woman with curious eyes. "I've spent the last 3 months trying to understand why I acted that way," Audrey continued. "Why I could be so blind. So arrogant. And I think it's because I'd built this whole identity around being better than other people. Smarter. More successful. More accomplished. And I was so busy trying to prove I was worth something that I forgot other people's worth isn't determined by what they can prove to me." A slight breeze moved through the trees. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Henry said nothing, but he didn't walk away either. "My father was right," Audrey said quietly. "I was ashamed. I am ashamed. But more than that, I'm grateful. Because that night, awful as it was, taught me something I desperately needed to learn. That real value isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just is. And if you're too busy looking at surfaces, you'll miss everything that matters." Essing. She paused, took a breath. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that you changed my life that night. By being exactly who you are. By showing me what real strength looks like." Henry studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not the polite smile from the restaurant. A real one. Warm and genuine, free of any bitterness. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "It takes courage to admit when we're wrong. To actually change. A lot of people never do." "I'm trying," Audrey said. "I'm really trying. That's all any of us can do." He glanced down at his son. "This is Leo. Leo, this is Miss Whitmore. She's a friend of Grandpa George's." "No, The boy stuck out his hand with endearing seriousness. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." Audrey shook his small hand, fighting back tears. "The pleasure is mine, Leo." They talked for a few more minutes. Nothing deep. Just small talk about the weather, the park, how Leo was doing in school. But underneath the ordinary words was something else. An understanding. A mutual recognition that both of them had learned something important. That both of them had grown. When they finally said goodbye, when Audrey watched Henry and Leo walk away hand in hand toward the parking lot, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the satisfaction of achievement or the high of success. Just simple, quiet peace. She sat back down on her bench and watched them until they disappeared from view. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere nearby, a father pushed his daughter on a swing. An elderly couple walked past sharing an ice cream cone. Ordinary moments. Ordinary people. All of them carrying their own stories, their own struggles, their own quiet triumphs. And for the first time in her life, Audrey Whitmore understood that all of this ordinary, unremarkable, beautiful humanity was worth more than every corner office and prestigious title she'd ever chased. Worth wasn't something you earned or proved or displayed. It was something you carried inside. Something you showed in how you treated others when no one important was watching. In how you raised your children. In how you faced hardship. In whether you chose kindness when cruelty would be easier. Henry Cole had taught her that. Not with lectures or judgment or revenge. Just by being exactly who he was. A good man. A good father. A quiet hero who'd never needed anyone to salute him to know his own worth. And that, Audrey realized as she watched the sun sink below the horizon, was the most powerful lesson she'd ever learned.